In the bustling heart of ancient Rome, the streets were alive with noise, the clatter of carts, the chatter of merchants, and the distant roar of the Colosseum. To outsiders, the empire looked like the center of civilization, a place of wealth, culture, and power. But hidden behind the marble columns and grand villas was another Rome, one rarely spoken of. A Rome where children, especially young girls, were stripped of their innocence and forced into lives of unimaginable hardship. For a wealthy Roman, slaves were as common as furniture. They were bought, sold, and traded without a second thought. Many of these slaves were captured during Rome's endless wars of conquest, and among them were little girls, as young as 7 or 8 years old, torn from their homes in distant lands like Gaul, Thrace, or North Africa. Their cries for their mothers echoed in markets, but no one cared. To the Romans, they were not children, they were property. Imagine a small girl, her hair tangled, her cheeks still wet with tears, standing in the slave market. She doesn't understand the language of the auctioneer shouting above her head. She only knows fear. A wooden tablet hangs around her neck, listing her qualities, age, origin, and what she might be useful for. To the crowd, she is not a child in need of comfort. She is an investment, a bargain to be struck. Once purchased, the fate of these young girls varied, but none of it was kind. Some were sent into the wealthy villas, where they worked from dawn until nightfall. Too young to carry heavy loads, they were ordered to fetch water, clean rooms, and serve food. Their small hands scrubbed marble floors that sparkled for banquets, but no one saw the pain in those hands. In silence, they worked, knowing that disobedience could mean a beating. Others were chosen not for work, but for entertainment. They were trained to sing, to dance, to play instruments. At first, one might think this a gentler life, but it was not. Behind the music and performance was humiliation, fear, and exploitation. These little girls performed not out of joy, but out of survival. They smiled when told, bowed when ordered, and hid their tears until the lights of the villa went out. The cruelest fate awaited those sold into darker corners of Roman society. For some, especially as they grew a little older, their value was not in their labor or their talent, but in their bodies. They were robbed of childhood in the most brutal ways, and history has too often chosen silence over their suffering. Yet their silence screams through the cracks of ancient texts, small hints from writers and poets who dared to mention what most preferred to ignore. But beyond the physical suffering, the greatest tragedy was emotional. These little girls carried memories of homes they would never see again. They remembered mothers' lullabies, the smell of bread from family hearths, the laughter of siblings. At night, lying on straw mats in dark, cold quarters, they dreamed of freedom. They whispered to each other, promising that one day they would be free, even if deep down they knew that day might never come.
Not every story ended in despair, though such endings were rare. Sometimes a girl might be taken in by a kinder mistress who treated her more like a companion than a servant. There were rare cases where such girls were adopted into Roman households, given a new name and a new identity. But these were exceptions, miracles almost. For the vast majority, life remained a cycle of servitude, pain, and loss. And so, while history books celebrate Rome's emperors, generals, and gladiators, the voices of these young girls remain buried. They are forgotten by time, erased by silence. But they were there. They lived, they cried, they suffered. And their stories deserve to be told. The night in Rome was never truly dark. The flicker of oil lamps and torches lit the narrow streets, casting long shadows that stretched like ghosts across the walls. In one of these shadows lay the quarters where the young slave girls slept. It was not a bedroom, not even a shelter, just a cramped space beneath the stairs or a corner of the kitchen floor. Straw scattered on the ground was their bed, and a thin piece of cloth was their blanket. The sound of laughter and music from the master's villa often drifted into their ears, reminding them of the world from which they were excluded. The girls would huddle together for warmth, whispering quietly in languages no one else in the household could understand. Their words were fragments of their lost lives, the names of their parents, the colors of their old clothes, the songs of their villages. And then, silence. Every child learns to cry when hurt, but these little girls learned quickly that tears brought punishment. A crying slave was a noisy slave, and a noisy slave was a nuisance. So they swallowed their sobs, burying their pain deep inside. With each day, the silence grew heavier, until even in moments of unbearable suffering, their lips did not tremble. Imagine being 10 years old and already knowing how to hide your soul. The Romans, in their grandeur, loved to boast about their civilization. They built aqueducts, temples, theaters. But while men applauded the strength of Rome, the smallest voices of Rome went unheard. A young girl, carrying a jug twice her size, staggering under its weight, was invisible to the grand senators who strolled past. She was as much a part of Rome as the marble statues. But, unlike the statues, no one preserved her name. One such girl, let us call her Livia, though history never wrote down her true name, might have once run barefoot through fields in Gaul. She remembered the warmth of her mother's embrace, the smell of wildflowers, the sound of the river. That was before the soldiers came, before she was chained, marched for days, and sold under the Roman sun. Now, in the villa, she polished bronze cups until her hands blistered. When she slowed, the overseer's whip cracked in the air, a cruel reminder that mercy was not part of her new world. Yet in her eyes lingered a spark, fragile but unbroken. At night, Livia told stories to the other girls. She would whisper about her village, about the games she once played, about the sky full of stars that seemed so much brighter back home. The other girls would close their eyes, imagining themselves there, clinging to these pictures as if they were treasures. In those stolen moments, in those fragile dreams, they found a kind of freedom that Rome could never chain. But the cruelty of fate never slept. One morning, a wealthy guest noticed Livia while visiting the villa. He laughed, saying she had a pretty face. The mistress of the house, jealous, ordered that Livia be sent to the dirtiest tasks, cleaning drains, scrubbing filth, working under the scorching sun. Each command was designed to break her spirit, to remind her that she was nothing. Still, she endured. Endurance became the secret strength of these little girls. Where Rome expected them to collapse, they learned to survive. They carried scars no one saw, built walls inside their hearts, and promised each other that one day, even if not in this life, their pain would be remembered. Sometimes the girls found strange allies. An old slave woman might slip them extra bread. A kinder master's son might shield them from harsher punishments. These rare sparks of humanity were like drops of water in a desert, never enough, but life-saving all the same. And yet, as months turned to years, many of the young girls faded into the machinery of Rome. They became nameless hands that cooked meals, washed clothes, swept courtyards. Their childhood disappeared, replaced by endless servitude. No birthdays were celebrated, no milestones acknowledged. They grew up in chains, and the world never knew their names. Rome's poets wrote verses about love and beauty. Its historians praised the might of legions. But no one wrote about the children who cleaned the floors beneath their feet. No one painted the tears of a girl forced to smile at her master's feast. Their lives were erased, as if they never existed. But listen closely to the silence of history, and you might hear them still, faint whispers of young voices calling out through time. We were here. We suffered. Do not forget us. The Roman villa gleamed in the sunlight, its marble columns rising high, a symbol of wealth and power. But in the courtyards behind those columns, shadows stretched across the ground where young girls bent over their endless tasks. To the guests who came for banquets and feasts, the slaves were invisible. To the girls, those guests were gods who decided their fate with a single glance. One evening, as the masters dined in golden light, the girls moved quietly in the background. They carried trays, poured wine, and wiped the floors. The guests laughed loudly, their voices echoing through the halls. Among them sat a senator, his eyes wandering toward the servants. He pointed to one small girl, no more than 11 years old. He said, "Bring her closer." The mistress of the villa forced the child forward. Her small hands shook as she set the goblet on the table. The senator chuckled, patting her head as if she were a pet. "Look at this one, so young yet already useful." The men around him laughed. The girl stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the ground, wishing she could disappear into the stone beneath her feet. Later that night, when the guests were gone and the villa grew quiet, the girls gathered in their corner. One of them, a frail child with hollow cheeks, whispered, "Why do they always laugh at us?" Her voice trembled, carrying both confusion and sorrow. Another answered, "Because they don't see us as human." The silence that followed was heavier than stone. In the months that passed, more of these girls vanished from the villa. Some were sold again, others sent away to harsher fates. Each disappearance left a scar among those who remained. They never knew if they would see their friends again, never knew whether the vanished ones found mercy or misery. Among them was Livia, the girl who told stories of her village. One evening, she was summoned to the mistress' chamber. The other girls clutched her hand tightly before she left, fear in their eyes. "Don't forget us," one of them whispered. Livia smiled faintly, though her heart pounded. "I will never forget," she promised. Hours later, she returned. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen with tears. She didn't speak. She lay down on the straw mat, turning her back to the others. They wanted to ask what had happened, but deep inside, they already knew. Rome had taken something from her that could never be returned. After that night, Livia's stories stopped. She no longer spoke of her village, or of stars, or of freedom. She worked in silence. Her spark dimmed, her eyes hollow. For the other girls, it was as if they had lost her, even though she was still there. The cruelty of Rome was not only in its chains and whips, it was in its ability to steal hope. When a child loses hope, childhood itself dies. Yet, even in the darkness, the girls held onto each other. They braided each other's hair with straw, they hummed lullabies in broken whispers, they shared crumbs of bread as if it were a feast. These small acts of kindness were their rebellion. Rome could take their freedom, their innocence, even their voices, but it could not completely erase their bond. One night, a storm swept across the city. Rain poured through the cracks in the roof, soaking the floor where the girls slept. Thunder rumbled like the anger of forgotten gods. Huddled together, shivering from the cold, they began to sing softly. The melody was not Roman, but from faraway villages, songs of mothers and fathers, of home and freedom. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to listen. For a moment, the girls' voices rose above Rome's cruelty. But as dawn broke, reality returned. The overseer's whip cracked, the girls were dragged back to work, their song silenced once again. History would not write down their names. The marble statues of Rome still stand, but the little girls who scrubbed the marble are dust. And yet their invisible footprints remain in every stone, in every shadow of those ancient streets. They were the forgotten daughters of Rome. And though Rome silenced them, their whispers still echo across time, waiting for someone to listen. In the city of Rome, young ones grew into adults. Their laughter slowly turned quiet, replaced by the calm rhythm of daily life. What was once light and playful had now become serious and still.
For many, their future was already decided. A few were sold off to brothels, some became lifelong house slaves, others were married off as concubines, to masters who saw them as possessions, not people. Each path was a prison, dressed in different walls. One by one, the girls who once whispered together under the kitchen stairs were scattered. Their names were never recorded. Their graves, if they had any, were unmarked. To Rome, they had vanished into nothingness, but in the silence of history, they remained.
Livia, the girl who once told stories, grew into a young woman. The sparkle in her eyes had faded, but something inside her refused to die. She carried with her the memories of every child who had shared that dark corner, of every friend who had disappeared into the shadows of Rome. One evening, as she watched the villa's marble steps, she looked up at the sky. The same stars that once shone over her village still glittered above Rome. She whispered to them, her voice trembling, "Do not forget us. Even if the world erases our names, let the heavens remember." That night, she taught the younger girls a secret song, not of Rome, but of home. A song about fields, about rivers, about freedom. She told them to sing it quietly, in their hearts, even when no one else could hear. As long as you remembered this song, she said, we are still alive. And so, in hidden corners of villas and marketplaces, in the silence of kitchens and under the weight of chains, young slave girls carried that melody, a whisper of resistance, a thread of memory. Rome rose to greatness, conquering lands, building monuments, carving its name into eternity. Emperors came and went, battles were fought and forgotten, temples were built and crumbled into dust. But the song, carried in the hearts of the nameless, outlived them all. Centuries later, when Rome itself collapsed into ruins, the stones remembered. Every column, every road, every amphitheater carried the invisible weight of those forgotten lives. The sound of their chains may be gone, but their silence remains carved into the bones of history. Think of it. For every statue of a Roman general, there were hundreds of little girls polishing its base. For every emperor's banquet, there were dozens of young girls cleaning the floors, serving the wine, hiding their tears. Their shadows walked beside Rome's glory, but no one wrote their names.
And yet, in the quiet of time, their whispers still reach us. They ask not for pity, but for remembrance. They ask that their stolen childhoods not be erased. They ask that when we speak of Rome, we do not only speak of emperors and gladiators, but also of the little girls whose lives built the empire from beneath. Their story ends not in victory, not in freedom, but in memory. For memory is the one thing Rome could never conquer. So the next time you hear the word Rome, do not think only of marble temples and triumphal arches. Think also of a small girl with tangled hair, standing in a marketplace, with tears in her eyes. Think of her carrying a jug larger than her body, scrubbing a floor until her hands bleed, singing a song she barely remembers just to keep herself alive inside. She may not have a name in history books, but she had a life, she had a soul, and her voice, along with thousands like hers, still cries out across the centuries. We were here. We suffered. Do not forget us.